How's everybody? Are you guys ready for the big freeze tonight? Well, it's not a freeze, but it's going to get really cold if you didn't already know, starting at like 8 p.m. So be prepared. And welcome to Texas if you're not from here. I actually kind of grew up here, so welcome. Anita, thank you so much for joining me.
Am I on?
Are you on?
Okay, good. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Zoya. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, I am very excited to chat. You know, Anita wears many, many, many hats, and she's a woman of many talents and an entrepreneur of many different things. But here today, we're talking about AI data centers. So, Anita, for those who don't know the work you do in data centers specifically, can you briefly tell us?
Yeah, sure. So like Zoya said, I have a few different companies, but my main business is called Arizona Land Consulting. And what we do is we develop data centers. And so we will buy land, we'll permit it, get the infrastructure in place, and then we will sell it to hyperscalers. So that's high level what we do. We sold a really big project a couple of years ago to a company called Tract, and we had bought the land for $40 million in 2022, and we sold it for $136 million 2 years later. And so since then, we've really pivoted our whole portfolio to data centers. With the rise of AI, which we'll talk about, that's really where we see this major land rush and opportunity. And so it's been really exciting.
Incredible. And just to briefly talk about myself a little bit, I'm Zoya, and I cover the 30 under 30 at Forbes. And so my whole world is talking to young founders, young investors, and that's why I'm particularly excited about this conversation. Because, you know, we didn't get in on the dot-com boom because we were simply just either not around yet or far, far too young. But now we're in this AI boom. And what we're seeing with young founders is they're starting tons of AI companies. Even if they had companies before, they're pivoting and building AI into their infrastructures. Or we see young investors trying to, you know, get in on the money and invest in those up and coming startups. What we don't hear much about is data centers, right, with these young folks. And I think that's because it feels a little untouchable. You know, we read about it all the time, and we read about billions and billions of dollars being invested and all these giant companies from Anthropic to OpenAI, you know, building data centers, getting involved in that. So it feels a little bit foreign. It feels like, oh, well, that's not for the average entrepreneur. There are obviously exceptions. But for the average entrepreneur, it feels like, I don't know how to get in on that. I don't have millions, let alone billions at disposal. But I think what Anita is going to prove for us today is you don't need to have millions at your disposal. And this concept doesn't need to be that foreign. There actually is a tangible way to plan around this and get in on this boom. So I'm very excited to learn. Yeah. But let's start at the basics.
Okay.
What is a data center?
Okay, yeah, that's getting really basic. But I think that's such an important question because I think there's a lot of miscommunications around what data centers truly are. So a data center at a very basic level is just a giant warehouse type building where you have millions of servers, which are essentially supercomputers, and that's where the internet lives. So anytime you Google something or ask ChatGPT something or upload a picture on Instagram, your device is sending a signal to that data center, which is processing your request, and it sends a signal back to you. And this happens in nanoseconds, but that's basically where the internet lives. Like, I kind of had this conception that there was a cloud somewhere in the sky, but it's actually in these buildings, these data centers. And so that's where data centers live. And as AI is becoming more mainstream and we're using it more and more, we're needing more and more of these data centers. And so that's why we're hearing about them a lot more now. They've actually been around forever, but the need for more of them is accelerating at a pretty fast pace right now.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. You know, they have been around forever. I think that's a lesser known concept because we've never talked about them as much as we are now. What's different for an AI data center versus just the typical ones that exist? Or is it kind of the same thing, but now we just need them at a super scale?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same thing, but we need more of them, and we need them at a higher scale. So if you think of something like if you ask ChatGPT to write an essay for you, it can literally write like a 10-page essay for you in seconds. So for that, it needs a lot of compute power. So you need a lot, the data centers need to be stronger, they need to be bigger, they need to be built at a bigger scale, and they need a lot more power, they need a lot more cooling. So that's why the need's a little bit different now. And so it is, AI data centers are just, they need more power and they have higher infrastructure needs, so they are a little bit different.
And as I mentioned, we hear about all this money being invested in all these big companies saying, oh, we're going to build a data center. What does that actually mean? Like, what is step one to building a data center?
Yeah, the very first step is you have to find the right site. So you have to find a site that has power, is close to power. You have to find a site where you can get the zoning in place. Right now, I'm sure everyone's reading about how a lot of data centers are getting opposition. Some of them are getting shut down. So you want to find an area where you can actually build one where you'll get community support and political support. And then the next step is actually, laying out the data centers and then building it. And it's similar to developing any real estate. And my background is real estate development, but it's a similar thing. But power is kind of the main differentiator between typical real estate and data centers.
And we're here to talk about how this is a gold rush, right? So give us a little insight into that. What sort of gold rush are we looking at? And is this something that every average entrepreneur, investor should be thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I think we are definitely in the middle of a gold rush. It's sort of the equivalent of when railroads were built in the 1800s for the industrial boom. And right now we're kind of going through that same thing where we're having this need for artificial intelligence. And so we need to find the infrastructure to actually support these AI models. So right now you're seeing everybody that owns land think that they have a data center, starting to develop data centers. They may or may not have the right site. It's actually shocking to most people how limited the supply of land is where you can put a data center and where it actually makes sense to put data centers. And so everyone's just coming in and trying to get their hands on these sites. So you're seeing all the hyperscalers like Google, Meta, Microsoft, they're just, rushing in and tying up sites wherever they can. So it's definitely this modern day gold rush, and it's similar to what, has happened at different points in time when you see a major technological revolution.
What's your story? When did you realize, oh, wait, I work in real estate. There's this huge opportunity here with data centers? Because, when we last chatted, you told me that you didn't necessarily know too much about AI. You learned on the go.
Yep.
So this was also a foreign concept to you, right? So what was the moment that it clicked, like, oh, there's something I should be doing here? And then what was your first step into the door?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it probably started when we bought the property that I mentioned, the one we bought for $40 million, and then we sold it. I think that was really when I realized that a lot of other types of developments were slowing down. Industrial developments, multifamily, residential, because rates were high, that those markets were getting, they were very stagnant, not much development was happening. But with data centers, it was the opposite. You were just seeing so much demand, and so it just made sense that this is kind of the next growth opportunity, and that's how we pivoted. Another turning point for me was when we had the big sale. We got a lot of national coverage for it. We were in the Wall Street Journal and a lot of other national press. And so we started getting a lot of attention from tech entrepreneurs. Particularly one of my partners in data centers is Chamath Palihapitiya. For those of you who don't know him, he was an early investor in Facebook, and he's a venture capitalist, very prolific investor. He's invested in a lot of different tech investments. And so him and I started working together. And what's been really amazing about that partnership is he comes from a tech background, I come from a real estate background. And so we're able to sort of merge the two. And so I've been able to really deepen my knowledge and understanding, and also just make connections that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to because of his background. And so it's just been a great partnership there. And so we're developing 2 data centers together. We're in the process of securing our 3rd site. So it's been great.
Can you give us a little bit of the playbook? What happens first? Do you go out and raise money from investors, or what's the first step you take, and then what happens next? Maybe the first 3 steps you have to take.
Sure. So I'll go back a little bit to my history, which is when I got started. So my family has a long history of land development in Arizona, but I started my own company about 7 years ago. And so when I started, the very first property I bought, it was a 20-acre piece of land. It was $1 million. And so I went to my network. I went to my friends and family. We fundraised. We bought this site. And then 6 months later, we sold that property for $8 million. And so after that, word started getting around about the returns. And so we really started growing our investor base really rapidly. And so then we started getting access to more and more capital. So we started buying bigger and bigger sites. And then that's kind of now where we're at, where we can buy these big sites that are 40 million, 50 million, even 100 million. And we can develop data centers on those. So that's kind of how we got started.
Hey, amazing. And talking about, I want to briefly chat about how multifaceted you are. I think the most exciting part about Anita's journey is she's taking the money that she's making with these data centers and she's investing them into her production company. So we're going to just go on a little brief segue.
Sure.
And can you tell us a little bit about the production company?
Sure. Yeah, so I started the production company. It's called Camelback Productions. Aparna, who's right there, was one of the first people I met about 3 years ago. And it was kind of a passion project. I am South Asian. I grew up feeling like there wasn't a lot of South Asian representation in the media. So we kind of came out to try to solve that issue, and just love of film and trying to do something different. And so we've been investing in independent films and producing independent films. We're now on our 5th movie. And it's been a wide range of from comedies to action thrillers. We have a movie with Cynthia Erivo called Prima Facie that we're in post-production on, which we're hoping will premiere at a film festival like this soon, and hopefully everyone will come and watch it. And so that's been really exciting. I think what's also an exciting opportunity on the film side is the ability for us to now integrate AI into some of the things that we do and try to bring down budgets, try to shorten post-production timelines, and just make the overall process more efficient. So that's something that we're actively looking into as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're at South by, so it's such a relevant topic for us to be talking a little bit about Hollywood and AI. Obviously, we see, all the negativity that it can bring, from deep fakes to actors not wanting to necessarily have an AI model of them play their roles, right? But there's also opportunity, as you said. So tell us a little bit more about how we can sort of reshape our thinking around AI in Hollywood.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a lot of concerns people have, but I believe that AI is not necessarily going to replace creativity in Hollywood. I think if used appropriately, I think it's only going to enhance what's made. Ben Affleck's company got acquired by Netflix last week, Interpositive. And if you look at some of the tools that they're going to offer, it's going to be a lot of things like, if you have wires showing in a scene, you can just edit them using AI rather than reshooting the whole scene, which costs a lot of money and adds a lot of time. And so I think for things like that, AI is going to be really valuable. For me as a producer, I'm constantly looking at budgets. It's how can we make the best movie possible for the lowest price possible, so our investment's protected. And I think AI is going to be really critical to help solve some of those problems. Like Prima Facie, the movie I just mentioned, we've been in post-production for 6 months now. And so with some of these AI tools, I think that can go from 6 months to maybe 2 or 3 months. And then what happens is your movies are coming out faster, and you can also make more movies because you're hopefully making them for a lower amount. And I actually think more movies get made with AI models.
Have you started using AI at Camelback, or is it something you're still exploring?
We're still exploring. There's a lot of different tools. Some of them are a little bit further along than others. So we're trying to figure out which ones are the best. We have a company we're looking to invest in that I think we're going to vertically integrate in the company, which I think will help. But we're still sort of exploring which models make the most sense.
Okay, amazing. We'll go back to data centers. You are from Arizona, and we have learned that that is a big hub for data centers. We're also in Texas, which has tons and tons of potential, so we have to mention that. But what really makes a region an AI hub?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different factors. I think the number one factor is you have to have available land. So you need these data centers are being built on thousands of acres of land. So you need places where you have that availability of land. So a place like California, it's going to be harder to find that at a price that makes sense. Arizona is great because you have large tracts of land, it's relatively affordable, power is relatively affordable, and then you also really need access to power, and that's the main driver behind these data centers is do we have land with power? So a lot of the data centers we're building, we're focusing on being next to one of the projects we have. It's next to Palo Verde Nuclear Power Plant. That's the largest nuclear plant in the country. And so as a result of that, we have power lines, substations, fiber. We have all the infrastructure that you need. So you want to be mindful that you're near power infrastructure because that's going to be the most critical part.
How does that impact the communities around? Because, if we're taking away power and putting them towards these data centers, what does that mean for, the residents and the people that live in those areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's the biggest concern people have with data centers. So right now, Trump announced, I think just last week, that data center developers are going to have to pay for their own power. And that's something a lot of companies are coming out and doing. And quite frankly, you just have to do that at this point. The current grid can't support the data center demand. I read a statistic that in the next 5 years, data centers are going to need about 97 to 100 gigawatts of power, which, just to put it in perspective, is the amount of power it takes to power the whole state of Texas. And so there's just no way that the grid can support that demand. So developers like myself, we're going to have to look at getting natural gas to the sites. We're going to have to look at nuclear. There's technologies like SMR, small modular reactors, which are basically nuclear reactors that can power, you can build blocks of them and power your data center. So there's going to be a lot of different things that we're all looking at right now, but it's not going to be the grid, and that's not going to impact residents. And I think that's been made very clear by all developers.
I don't know if there's any city officials or governors or mayors in this room, but should there have been, or maybe there is and nobody wants to raise their hand, what should they know about, building data centers in their regions, especially if it is a place like, Arizona or Texas where these things are actively happening? Or maybe it's a place where they aren't happening yet, but there is potential, right? So what should they know?
Yeah, data centers actually, if you put them in the right place, are actually great for your economy. When you build, the concern most people have is if you build a data center next to a lot of residential development, that's when you're going to get pushback from communities and neighbors. Nobody wants to live next to a data center, and I think that makes perfect sense. I wouldn't want to live next to one either. But if you're strategic with the locations, if you're building them in areas that otherwise don't have a lot of development, you have a lot of vacant land, they're actually great for those communities. What the project that we did that we sold 2 years ago, that project's going to bring $100 million in tax revenue to the city that we are building it in. So that city, Buckeye, Arizona, it's a very small town. It's a growing town. So with $100 million a year in tax revenue, they can essentially build freeways, they can build schools, they can build water infrastructure, and they can really make that community thrive and grow. Another example is Abilene, Texas. For anyone that's from Texas, no one knew what Abilene was until recently. And now you have homes that are being built there. I personally know so many investors that have been buying homes because they see what's coming. And there's, restaurants, there's tourism in Abilene that didn't exist before. So if you build them in the right areas, it's actually great for those communities. And I think you just have to be careful. You don't want to put it in an area that has existing development because you're going to then disturb what's there. So I think it's the location that's going to be really important.
As we're talking about communities, I think it's also important to acknowledge the sustainability factor, right? What does this really mean from a perspective of water usage and pollution, especially around the folks that these centers are being built?
Yeah, I think that's another misconception, I think, about data centers is that they're bad for the environment. But data centers, just like any other type of development, they have to follow certain processes that are in place. So for us, we have to follow EPA guidelines, which is the Environmental Protection Agency. So right now we're applying for dust permits, noise pollution. We can't emit too much dust. And it doesn't matter if we're doing a data center or if we're doing another industrial type development, we have to follow the same guidelines. So data centers, just like any other development, can't exceed these things. I know there's Elon Musk came under fire because his XAI plant violated, I think there were some dust levels that they pushed and they shouldn't have. But in Arizona, from what we're seeing, I mean, you have to get permits. We're applying for our permits right now, and it's a whole process. Like you have to show the turbines you're using, how they're going to be processing the gas, and you're not going to get a permit if you're emitting too much. So data centers, just like anybody else, have to follow, kind of all the development standards that are in place.
I do want to talk about the water side of things because I want you to basically explain how data centers use water, because I'm a very online person, and I will tell you that the internet thinks that every time you ask ChatGPT a question, you're using X amount of water. And then we have so many fun jokes on the internet being like, I didn't take a bath today, so I could ask ChatGPT about my situationship. So can you clear the air? Or maybe it is true. Like, how does the whole water situation actually work?
Yeah, so I don't think that's a crazy thought because data centers historically have been very high water users. And so in the past, they've used tons of water. Now what you're seeing is data centers are becoming a lot more efficient. They're using different technologies, liquid cooling, things like that, where they're not depending on water. Google announced last week that their data center in Texas is not going to be using any water. It's all going to be using air cooled. So that's now what is having to happen. Sustainability is number one priority. And quite frankly, no one has access to that level of water anymore to support these data centers. So I think people can start showering again. It's fine. But I know where this thought is coming from.
Yeah, no, because, I feel like there are definitely parts of this country alone that are in such a water crisis. So I think it's an important thing to acknowledge. I'm very curious about this air cooling situation. Can you explain a little bit about how that might work?
Yeah, and I don't know the technical details, but basically when you have so many servers and processors, they overheat. And so the air cooling is basically using air instead of water to keep the machines cool.
So for, the work you do specifically, when you are buying land, do you have to think about things like water and power and where they're going to come from, or is that somebody else's business?
No, that's very much my business. And it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. So we have to make sure that we have power lines. We have to work with the utilities, make sure that there's capacity. Right now, one of the biggest challenges that we're facing is utilities have power lines, they have the infrastructure, they just don't have the capacity. So it's a matter of figuring out a short-term solution. So right now we're exploring natural gas as a bridge solution. We have some natural gas lines to our site, so we're in the process of acquiring some natural gas. That'll get us powered for maybe 3 to 5 years, and then at that point we're talking to the utilities about letting the grid kind of kick in. And then I think there's also going to be a component of SMRs that we use on our site. So it's all types of things. But yeah, those are very big things you need to worry about. If you don't think about that, you're going to buy a piece of land and not be able to develop on it. So if you don't do your due diligence on those things, it'll come back to haunt you.
Going from traditional real estate into now doing something that's so much more complex, what's sort of the biggest lesson learned?
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson is I feel very fortunate that I have partners that know the tech space so well. But I think the biggest lesson that I would say is if it's not an area of expertise, partner with someone that has it. I think if I went out and tried to build these data centers without the tech knowledge, I would have gotten in trouble. And I see a lot of my competitors who have land that are zoning their sites or marketing their sites as data centers, but they have no path to power. They have no infrastructure in place where they can actually build a data center. And so I would say getting that partnership where you get the tech expertise too is really powerful.
Interesting that you mentioned competitors because I honestly hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about your competition. I'm thinking about, Anthropic competing with OpenAI. I'm not thinking about the people that come before them to actually make the data centers happen. So tell us a little bit about the competition. What does it look like? Who are you competing with?
Yeah, there's a handful of data center developers. The a big one is Crusoe. They're building the Abilene data center, the Stargate project. They're very active. They're buying land everywhere. QTS, that's a subsidiary of Blackstone. Their developers doing something similar to what we're doing. Tract, the company that I sold land to, they're data center developers that go out and find powered land. So there are quite a few people in this space.
But, if we are in this sort of, as the United States in a race to create more and more data centers and get ahead in the tech game, especially with AI, is it really competition or is it, the more the merrier?
I would say it's the more the merrier. And I think you bring up a really good point, and that we are kind of in this race against other countries. China, for instance, we do need to kind of win this AI race. Right now, all the leading AI models, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, they're all American-based AI models. The risk that we run if we don't build these data centers fast enough is you're going to have another country have AI models that are just more efficient, that are more sophisticated, and then we're forced to use those AI models. And that would be a national security threat. There would be a lot of issues with that. So we don't want to put ourselves in that situation. And I think that's why there's this race to getting as many of these data centers up and running. So I think the more the merrier. I don't think anyone should view them as competitors. It's like the more projects we get up, the better.
What's your model of choice?
I personally love ChatGPT. Just because I've been using it from the beginning, I feel like my chatbot knows me well, and I feel like it's easy to get the answers I need. But for certain things, like when I'm reading a script for the production company, I would say Claude, I think, is what I go to for that. So I do have different things. Today, I was asking Claude if my outfit was appropriate for this panel. So every model is a little different. I don't love my ChatGPT fashion advice.
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest that because it's a big yes man, right?
Yes, for sure. Everything looks amazing.
Everything
according
looks
to
amazing.
ChatGPT.
Yeah, no, I have my chat history off because apparently it feeds it into the universe of the internet. So my history's off. So my bot doesn't know me as well, but I do.
I
Love
know I'm living on the edge, not doing that. But
Have you? Just out of curiosity, and this could totally be a no, but have you used? Have you ever gone to Gemini or Chat and used it to actually for your work and being like, okay, like what do I do with this data center problem I have right now?
yeah, for sure, all the time, especially for AI and data centers. It's not something that I've been doing for years. It's something relatively new to me. So I initially was always depending on AI to help me like understand how things work, even understanding what goes into a data center, like the servers, how they're laid out. AI has been super helpful for that.
Okay, incredible. Now I want to know a little bit about the demand, right? So there's obviously the AI boom. We talked about the gold rush, but when it comes to the lands that you are developing for these data centers, who are your customers? Let's start there.
Yeah. Yeah, the customers are the big hyperscalers. So you have Microsoft, Google, Amazon, XAI. those are the main companies that are out there looking for this space. You do still you have, groups like Blackstone that will buy data centers and then they'll sell it to hyperscalers, but mainly it's the hyperscalers that we're targeting.
And so, is there competition between these hyperscalers when it comes to, actually, let me rephrase this. When you are trying to secure customers, are you the one going out and pitching to multiple different companies, hey, I have this, land, it'd be great for your data center? Or are you getting an influx of demand where it's like, we'd like your data center and we'd like your data center and we'd like your data center?
Yeah, it's a little bit of the second one right now. I, have been meeting with a lot of AI leaders through Chamath and his network. And the main thing that people are saying right now is they're struggling to find land that's powered. So anybody that has land that has solutions for power, you can really pick, who you're going to sell to. For us right now, we're working on zoning for a few of our sites. So we're waiting to get the zoning in place before we sort of decide which way we want to go.
And you've already done one project where, you flipped the land and you sold it. How did you sort of decide on pricing? Because again, we hear about billions and billions of dollars being invested, but obviously that goes into after you buy the land, you have to actually build the data center. But when it comes to the land, it seems like and given the demand, it seems like there is opportunity to, selfishly just up and up and up the price.
Sure.
So how do you kind of decide the price points?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the land that we sold, where we sold it for almost 4 times, we sold that land at zoning, so we didn't have the power in place. So that was a little bit of a lower price. Now, some of the sites that we're looking at, we're looking to get power in place. So at that point, the sky's the limit. It's, billions of dollars that we're talking about that we could sell these for.
Do we want to talk a little bit about the project? Do we want to show some slides?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is the project that we're developing. This is the one that Haciampa Ranch is a project that we have with Chamath. And so that's our site plan on the right, but we're basically we have full entitlements in place. We go in front of City Council in April. We had some neighbors that were opposed. We had about 5 neighbors that live right at the base of the project. And so we spent a lot of time with them. We made some concessions. We basically are going to have a buffer zone where we don't build for about 50 feet from their property. And what we do build will not be a data center. It'll be offices. And so we made a lot of concessions. We have like landscaping, design standards. So the neighbors were actually very happy with what we did, and so they signed a letter of support for our project, and so we're feeling good about it. The political support's there. The supervisors in this district love data centers in this area because of the tax revenue they'll bring. Desert Whisper, which is just to the west, that's the new site that we're in the process of acquiring right now. That's about 1,000 acres, and whatever power sources we use on Haciampa Ranch, we can drag them over to Desert Whisper because it's just about 3 miles to the west. So there's a natural gas line and there's a 500 kV line and there's fiber in the road, Indian School Road, which is just on the southern border. So we're excited about the potential of what we can do there.
Is there any disadvantage to having 2 data centers so close to each other?
No, there's only benefits because you can have infrastructure sharing. So whatever utilities and power we use on one site, we can drag it over and it's pretty close. So it's not too high of a cost. When you start getting further away from one another, the cost to drag power lines or gas lines can really start to add up. So being so close by is actually beneficial, and having support, having gone through the zoning on one site, we know that we have the support on the second one. So I think that's helpful. We're starting in a completely new area. You're not really sure what you're walking into. So we actually think it's beneficial to be so close to one another.
I'm curious about, this is just a thought that came to me, because as you were talking about neighbors and building around them, and we discussed a little bit of community, are we ever going to see a world where we're seeing existing infrastructure, existing homes, existing malls, things like that, being taken down because they are prime land for data centers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I I only see that happening if there's no demand for those malls anymore. So there are a lot of malls that are just naturally going out of business because people aren't going there as much. Retail is hurting. And I think that's a trend we're seeing everywhere. So I think if you have buildings, commercial buildings in particular, that are sitting vacant, which a lot of them are because of, what's happened after COVID, people are working from home now, so there's not as much need for commercial office. So I think if you're going to have abandoned buildings that are not really being used, I think data centers could make a lot of sense there.
What about renters? Is there a world where we see people, having to leave their homes, whether it's apartment buildings or proper like houses?
I don't see that happening. I don't. I think if you're a responsible developer, you're mindful of what's in the around your land, so you plan to be away from people and you're not coming in. No one is trying to bulldoze anybody. You have to just be smart and pick sites that are going to have, not have too much resistance or opposition.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really helpful to kind of clear a lot of the air on this, because I think when the average person, the average reader thinks about data centers, we have all these negative ideas in mind. We discussed a lot of the misconceptions, but what's sort of the biggest one, or one that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I think we talked about a lot of them. One thing a trend that I'm starting to see that I didn't see before is I do think data centers are getting a little bit politicized, where it's almost becoming like whatever political party you belong to, you either like them or you don't. Like Bernie Sanders has spoken out against data centers and has said, he doesn't think we should be building them. And then you have, Trump, who's very much for data centers. So I think a lot of people are basing some of their thoughts and misconceptions on some of those things, which I think shouldn't be happening because everyone's using AI regardless of political beliefs. And so I think that's a trend that I'm starting to see more now. We had a zoning case in a city called Chandler in Phoenix, and there were 300 people that showed up to oppose this data center, and they didn't live in the community. They were bussed in from other states. No one knows where these people came from. They were wearing masks, and they were just, against the data center, and it got shut down. It was, there was so much opposition that the politicians just, kind of vetoed it. And that's what's scary, is we don't want to see things like that happen. Even on some of our projects, like we've started seeing letters from groups that we know don't live in our community. And so it's, you're just wondering, like, where are these letters coming from? Who are they coming from? And so that's something that, I just feel like we need to be careful about. Is this is not a political issue. This is a matter of us winning the AI race.
Mm-hmm. But there has to be some politics involved, right? Like what's coming out of the current administration that we should be aware of?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think Trump I think it was last week or maybe the week before, there was a bill he passed where data centers have to pay for their own power. And I think that's great, because I think people should feel at ease that it's not going to impact the ratepayers. Data center developers are going to have to pay for that themselves. And so I think, I do think that some of these misconceptions, there needs to be more PR around. I don't know if data centers have done a great job of PR, so maybe we need more of that.
Business opportunity, guys.
Yeah, and then I think also, like, you have to look at the economic impact it has to certain regions. And I know I've said this so many times, but it's so important where you put them. If you're putting them in a neighborhood, you're going to have issues. And I don't think that's a smart thing to do. If you're putting them in an area where there's not, like, you can see this map, there's no development out here. There's a few residents that live on these large, 5-acre lots, but you don't have like grocery stores and schools. So having a data center out here is not really hurting too many people.
Mm-hmm. I love that you said that the data centers haven't done a good job at PR. What do you think is the best way to sort of educate the average consumer? Because I will say, as, again, the consumer of the internet, my mind always thinks about data centers negatively. Of course, as a reporter, I know better. but not everybody is a reporter. So, what would you ideally like to see in that world on how we educate, everybody else that
Yeah.
is, whether they like it or not, going to be involved in some way now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one of the issues that exists is most Americans, there was a survey that was done, more Americans are afraid of AI and think AI is going to be more harmful than it's going to be beneficial. So I think some of the issues stem from just that belief of being scared of AI and the negative impacts. Data centers, like I said, have been around forever, but I think when you say AI data centers, I think that scares people a little bit more. And I think the PR that needs to happen from the developers is your rates aren't going to go up for power. We're not going to use the water that you need. They're not harmful to the environment. We have to stick to, whatever the development standards are in a certain area. And these are the economic benefits that these areas are going to get from building data centers. So I think those would be the messages I would focus on.
Yeah. And I think everyone in this room is here because they have some interest in data centers, right? Actually, let me have a show of hands of who would invest in one if they had, the funds. Okay, so that's a lot of people. Now, Anita, you got to tell us what's the opportunity here for the average Americans and how can they get involved, without having millions on the ground floor?
Yeah, so there's different ways to invest. So for our company, we take investors as small as $100,000 check size. If you want to invest in data centers, there's groups like us that exist that would make sense. If you want to just invest in AI in general, there's so many AI companies right now. There's a lot of data center companies that are building different technologies. So there's ways to invest in different power things. But just strictly a data center investment, if you guys have any interest, we can talk after. But we have a lot of different opportunities around that.
And why should they invest? We did talk about this gold rush, but give us, you know the risk and the reward. So give us both the risk and the reward, actually.
Yeah, the risk is, I think the risk right now, the biggest challenge most of the data centers face is power and figuring out how to get to power the fastest. Everyone's racing. That's literally all I do all day from morning to night is have different meetings, and we're trying to figure out what the best and most efficient power solutions are for us. So that's where I see the risk. I would say that would be the biggest risk. And then the reward is, the appreciation you can get when you have a data center site, which those are becoming harder and harder to find. There's going to be a huge appreciation for those. And we've had a lot of our returns for our investors have been anywhere from 100 to 800% over like a 2 to 3 year period. So there's quite a bit of upside.
Yeah, so the reward is you get rich. So the timeline is 2 to 3 years?
Yes.
Okay, amazing. I think we'll open up to some questions if anybody in the audience would like to ask Anita anything at all. There's a mic right there. I don't know if we're doing a pass around or a come up.
Miners didn't do so well. People who sold shovels and sold jeans are still around. So which are you? And secondly, rather than run around and raise capital $100,000 to throw, why not sell yourself to a hyperscaler and let them integrate the function internally? And I'm just curious as to how, as a founder, you deal with those two kinds of issues strategically. Thanks.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So the reason why we can't just go straight to a hyperscaler is because there's quite a bit of development that needs to take place beforehand. And hyperscalers actually don't get involved in that stage. So we find the land, prep it, zone it, entitle it, power it, and then sell it to the hyperscalers. Their job's usually just to build the data center, and that's their core competency. And also, it's having the local relationships that really allows you to do what we do, and they don't often have that. We've seen a lot of hyperscalers come in and try to build projects, and it either takes forever or they'll have a lot of issues just because they don't know the system, they don't know who the local connections are. And since we've been doing this for so long, we have those. And so that's kind of what the benefit that we bring in.
Thanks. I have a few questions. First one is, what was the original intended use for the piece of land that you ended up pivoting to? Was it
Yeah.
supposed to be residential? What was the?
Yeah, great question. So it was a residential master plan community. It was going to have about 10,000 homes. And then it didn't have the water to support that. And so because it didn't have the water, we were able to come in and buy it at a very, very low basis. We did I bought that site in 2 weeks. So it was a very fast deal. So we got a great price on it. And then we very quickly rezoned it to industrial and then sold it to, and then got involved in data centers soon after.
Got it. And then I think based on what you're saying, the takeout is almost always the actual hyperscaler. There's not like a builder in between that builds it and then leases it.
The sale that we had was to Tract.
Yeah.
Tract is actually like an intermediary between us and the hyperscaler.
Yeah.
They power the land. So we're now acting as Tract would, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
At that time, we didn't have the wherewithal to do it, but
Yeah.
now we do.
And you said you made like what if you sort of walk through a deal now,
Yeah.
like what's the rough price per foot that you can buy sort of raw land in Arizona? Then you
Yeah.
could get it zoned and then powered. Sort of what's the rough?
Yeah. So the site that we're buying now, it's about 25,000 per acre. So it's like 50 cents a foot. If at zoning, it's probably worth $2 a square foot just at zoning. If we can get power, it's worth up to $20 a square foot. And it's hard to, people ask me all the time, they're like, what would a hyperscaler buy it for? At the point where you have power, you would have a bidding war, and it's really hard to say. But in Phoenix, there was recently a sale that for $40 a square foot from a hyperscaler, that land otherwise was worth about $8 a square foot. Yeah. So there was like a 5x premium just because it was for a data center.
And I'm sorry, I'm like hogging it, but one more
Yeah.
question. Does latency matter at all? Like, do you want to be near population centers? And like, I know like 10 years ago, they used to talk about latency with data centers. Is that gone now?
I think it's gone now. Yeah. Now they're so powerful that you can have distance. Like Abilene, for instance, is not really next to major population centers, but they're just so big in scale that that is no longer an issue. But yeah, before, like, you needed to be right next to where your customer base would be.
And I'm sorry, one last one. I noticed on the map, the site plan, there were like a lot of buildings. I would have expected sort of one big building. Is there a reason? I
Yeah.
think the yellow things were buildings, right?
Yeah, the
there a reason
reason
it's built
we
like that?
are doing it like this is just so we have flexibility, so we can phase it, mainly because this site is up to 2 gigawatts of power. So we're going to phase it out where we maybe start with like 300 megawatts first, and then we have it in phases. It's also, we don't know if like one hyperscaler would want the whole thing. We may sell it to like multiple hyperscalers. So it's just to give us flexibility.
Got it. Makes sense. All right. Thank you.
You spoke about a lot of the tax revenue opportunities that these data centers could bring to communities. I'm curious to know what sorts of occupations would this open for talent?
Yeah, that's a great question. So data centers create a lot of construction jobs when they're being built. There's not too many jobs once they're operational. It's maybe a couple hundred for a big data center project, so it's not a lot of jobs. But it's a lot of ancillary jobs. So you have construction, and then you have the other businesses that come with it. So it can be pretty big. But then I think the main thing is the tax revenue that they bring. With the tax revenue, the cities can put that into so many other things. So that's kind of the main driver behind them.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Alara Conti with Realtor.com, and I actually grew up in Arizona.
Oh, nice.
I'm curious to hear a little bit more about, you had mentioned that this site was originally zoned for a big residential development, but they weren't able to secure the water for that. Could you talk through the process of getting the water for this data center and how you were able to do that when they weren't?
Yeah, sure. So in Arizona, and this is getting really technical, but there's a thing for if you have a master plan community, which is essentially like 5 homes to an acre, you need something called a certificate of assured water supply. And so this only applies to residential development. It doesn't apply to industrial development. And so there was a moratorium put on the certificates that were being issued by Arizona Department of Water Resources. And so that's why if you have a subdivision where you're going to cram a lot of homes, they just can't get the water to prove for that. But if you're doing an industrial development, they need a lot less water, so it's much easier to get.
And just one quick follow-up there. Was the moratorium related to the current negotiations of water rights with the Colorado River states? And does that at all factor into your investments in these data centers in Arizona?
Yeah, no, great question. Yes, it was part of that. That moratorium does not affect data centers or industrial development. So once that moratorium was put in place, we did pivot our portfolio away from residential, and we went completely into industrial. And so a lot of these sites are residential zoned, but we're now repurposing them to industrial or data centers.
Great, thank
Yeah.
you.
Uh-huh.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for the chat. It's very interesting. Once the data centers are up and running, is there any concern with the talent that will be required to run the day-to-day and the know-how for these data centers?
No, it's not that's not a major concern. I think you want to be in areas where you have the talent. Like in Phoenix, there's quite a bit of talent. It might not be in this specific area, but we feel confident that we can pull it in from the Phoenix area.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I imagine that if you could use solar or wind, that would be the solution.
Yep.
How big is the discrepancy between what can be generated with current technology and the total power need?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would love to do solar, and unfortunately, solar's just not as efficient. So I think the math is for 10 acres, you can get 1 megawatt of power. So for Hacienda Ranch, for instance, we would get, if we did solar for the whole site, we would get about 100 megawatts of power. Whereas if we're using natural gas and grid, we're up to 2 gigawatts. So it's just such a big discrepancy. Hopefully, my hope is as time goes on, solar becomes more efficient, but we're just not there yet today.
Hi. I get that the data centers produce a lot of jobs and tax revenue, while they're being built. Once it's built, what is driving all that tax revenue later, and what is the advantage to the communities, after they're built?
Yeah, so once they're built, you're getting annual tax revenue. So like the case that I mentioned in Buckeye, they're getting $100 million per year in perpetuity. So
Like property taxes?
yes, yeah. So with that revenue, they can fuel so much development in other parts of the city. I mean, that's transformative to a city. And so the mayor of Buckeye is a good friend of mine. He was thrilled with us bringing this data center there, and they were so supportive, made sure, we got whatever we need. But it was a strategic location. It was close to their airport. It wasn't next to any homes. There's other sites that him and I have talked about, and he was like, I would never let a data center come there. It's not even close to homes, but it's like maybe 2 miles from homes, which is too close. So I think it's, just you have to be mindful of being away from residents.
Mm-hmm. And when will this facility be? Is this being built now, or will this come online?
We're in the process of getting our entitlements, and then the next phase will be permits. So I would say in the coming year or so, and we're also in the process of securing natural gas, which would be our power solution.
And how long, did you say 2 to 3 years to build something like this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be really fast.
Okay, thanks.
Amazing. I think that's all the time we had for questions. But Anita, clearly there's so much interest from the people in this room, and I know so many other folks. What sort of resources would you point them to if they want to continue to educate themselves about this topic and maybe even reach you and find a way to, get involved?
Yeah, for sure. I think the best way to reach me would be our website, arizonalandconsulting.com, or socials. My Instagram is Anita Vermalalian. That's a great way. LinkedIn, Anita Vermalalian. But yeah, happy to. Please reach out. Happy to talk more.
Okay, amazing. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Anita.
That was great, Zoe.